Welcome to our second episode of Dive In with the DOV. I am Alondra Garza.
And I am Gilliam Pinchevsky.
And we are super excited for the opportunity today to chat with Mia Gilliam to learn more about her experiences as a scholar of color, and advice for moving the field forward.
So Mia is a doctoral student in the Department of Criminal Justice at Indiana University, Bloomington, and a current visiting assistant professor of criminal justice in the Department of Poli-Sci at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. Her research focuses on victimization, both in person and cyber, the intersection of race and ethnicity, as well, and gender and crime, cultural crim, and popular culture and crime. So thank you so much for joining us today, Mia.
Thank you for having me. This is a pretty cool experience you're doing here. So
awesome. And rock on the shirt. We like it.
Thank
for
you.
All of our viewers, those are still available.
They're really soft. I'm not kidding. Buy one, if only because it's so soft. It's worth it.
So Mia, can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, why you decided to pursue a PhD?
Yeah. So I am, now I'm 28. So typically anywhere I go, like I'm the baby of the department in most places. But so I am a biracial. So my biological father is Black, my mom's white. I was raised by my mom in Champaign, Illinois. I don't know if it's where the U of I is. And so relatively diverse town, still has pockets, as most towns do. But so been raised here my whole life, and my grandfather, so my mom's dad, was a Chicago cop, actually. And my mom was a social worker for the Department of Children and Family Services. So I kind of just took what both of them did and wanted to understand why, and comboed them into my own version. And I briefly had that stint, of course, as all criminologists do, where I want to be an FBI profiler.
I had that.
Everybody had it at some point. Like, I was sure convinced I was going to be Emily Prentice from Criminal Minds. That didn't happen. Which probably helped drive some of the media pop culture areas of my research and things I find interesting anyway. But so, crime, victims, why people do things they do, always been at the forefront of kind of my mindset. And so landed at Illinois State University, where I did my undergrad and my master's straight through. And then I really liked, during my master's program, kind of honed my interest into victims, because I just found everything fascinating. I did my master's thesis on wrongful convictions, but like official misconduct that had occurred in wrongful conviction cases. Really kind of honed my interests in victimization during that master's program. And then I ended up at IU for the PhD. And it's been four years.
Awesome.
Yeah. I also love the teaching side of it, though. So, like, I briefly considered when I was at the master's point stopping, but I really, really enjoy teaching. And so just to get the ability to do that, accommodated accordingly, and the ease of that, marketability wise, having the degree just makes that so much easier to do that as a career. So
very cool. And we look forward to hearing more about your teaching strategies on our next podcast.
Yeah.
So let's get right into it. So we want to talk about kind of your personal experiences in navigating academia. And so recently, I'm sure you've seen the hashtag Black in the Ivory Tower. It's been trending with Black and people of color sharing their experiences in academia. So the DOV is committed to listening and sharing the experiences of our fellow Black and POC scholars. And we want to do better to address inequalities both within AAC, the academy in general, the DOV, and the criminal justice. So we acknowledge that our division lacks diversity and it's actively involved in efforts to do better. So part of that entails having these conversations, no matter how difficult they can be. So we just want to talk about your experiences and listen with as much details as you feel comfortable talking about your doc program and just the academy.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was actually just listening to a podcast. So I'm a big soccer fan. And so U.S. Women's National Team, the NWSL, I'm all about it. But so Julie Foudy has her own podcast. It's called Laughter Permitted. But she had Crystal Dunn and Jessica McDonald on to basically talk about their experiences as women of color in this sport. And so growing up, I also played soccer. And so it's a lot of it is so almost in the same way that, you're socialized as a woman to behave in certain ways and things like that are just kind of innate in your head. And like, you don't think twice about it. You get that. And that's on the same level as a person of color. Same things kind of happen at a young age. So like, even if no one was necessarily like, at some points in my life, yeah, but like was never like overtly racist or saying terrible things, the microaggressions are what get to you. So like, you're so well spoken, or like you can read so well from like a very young age, and you start to internalize those things and be like, well, yeah, why can't I read? Like, right. Kinds of things. And so, just those kinds of things that then stay in your head. And then everybody, in academia especially, like will combat and deal with like imposter syndrome. But when you have 20 plus years behind you of those kinds of microaggressions, even in a sick place where you probably shouldn't be having imposter syndrome, building from that kind of a weak foundation makes all these kinds of interactions really, really heavy, like way heavier than they would have been if it was just your first time hearing something like that. But reading through the Black and the Ivory Tower stuff was both, it was really validating, but also, dang, it really wasn't just me. And you're just like kind of disappointed that, darn, you had really hoped you were a one-off kind of situation because you don't want anybody else to be having to deal with it. But for me, nothing terribly overt. Again, just a lot of it's been internalized. And so like you just kind of learn how to deal with it from a younger age in different aspects of my life. So whether that was because of sports or school, so I don't know, maybe I'm making myself sound young, but like No Child Left Behind was a thing when I was very young. And so my mom was asked to assign a race to me. And so as, a biracial child, she was like, that doesn't work. She's both. And like had tried to be on the phone, was writing letters, doing all of these things. And they basically came back with, if you don't pick one, we pick one for you. And like, at that point, what do you do? Because, she always worked very hard not to diminish any part of my identity, no matter what it was. So what do you do with that? Like, okay, do you classify her as white because that's technically part correct? Or do you say Black, and then as, a Black girl I was intelligent and had good standardized test scores, whatever the hell that meant. But, and then say, are they going to try to prop me up on a pedestal and say, look at how great we're doing with these people, and like make me the token, like, I don't know, example of, look, we're doing great. She's thriving. And it's like, well, no. And it's a complicated situation. You don't know what to do with it. But when me as like a fifth grader knew that was something that was happening, like, again, it just sits in your brain and you just kind of deal with it and move on.
I'm so sorry that you've been experiencing, this, since you were a young child, but, from like these formal institutions have like put this pressure on you. And I thank you for sharing that with us. I think, more people need to realize where this stems from. And the impact that it has on somebody
Yeah,
from a very young age.
it gets really interesting too, because then you also kind of internalize it and start to not necessarily agree with it, but then I put so much pressure on myself, because then, there aren't a whole bunch of, especially women of color in academia. And so, like walking into a classroom as an instructor and having people be like, which I'm sure that you guys have even experienced just as women, but be like, oh, you're the instructor, you're not
Right.
a student. And
because they're expecting a white male to walk in.
Right, like everyone has these, implicit biases and expectations about what they see. But so, I personally try to keep in mind that there's probably a student sitting in there that looks like me, that wants to do what I'm doing. So we're going to take it on the nose and deal with the dumb comments and whatever, so that they feel more comfortable and hopefully don't have to deal with these kinds of unnecessary dumb things. But it's really interesting too that you mentioned like the Black in the Ivory Tower hashtag. I just saw this morning that I think it was, I don't know, someone had been talking about it like in a like more of an official kind of statement, but then didn't give credit to the Black women who constructed the hashtag. And it's like, this was the whole point. Like, you're doing it again. Like, it's just mind blowing.
Do you think that there's a way that we can move forward? Do you think that bringing awareness is actually going to make meaningful change? Or do you think people are going to talk about it now and then forget, like so many other things? Do you think that there's like a chance for actually people to realize what, Black and persons of color in academia and otherwise are going through, and actually, make conscious effort and to change the way that, we do things, we operate?
Yeah, I mean, so one person's opinion, but this time it feels different somehow. It's not just like a weekend and we're done. Protests are still happening. Granted, media coverage of it has completely shifted and is disappearing. Even though,
and I'm curious on our next podcast to talk to you about that, because you focus on,
yeah, and so it's really interesting to see these kinds of things play out. For me in my life, people in my community, I've been having conversations with friends, and a lot of them are putting in the work. And like my best friend and I, she was talking to me and she was like, I don't want you to and I was like, no, these are the kinds of conversations we should be having, and I don't want to have to educate you about every little thing, but I will gladly point you to resources where you can do the work yourself. I have a friend who I've known since like kindergarten. We used to live in the same neighborhood, we went to the same schools. She's been like the perfect picture of allyship in terms of learning and unlearning behaviors and just asking for guidance and listening to other people. Because that's honestly all it's going to come down to in terms of like, making an effort, making the changes. So like if you're reading through the Black in the Ivory Tower threads and things and thinking, oh, well, I didn't see that, or that wasn't my experience, or don't discount it and just say it didn't happen. Like, this is how this was experienced by this person. And like, I have to consider that my experiences as a biracial woman of color are completely different than someone who's, identifies as Black, or, colorism is totally a thing. And, that shifts the conversation even more and changes your experiences. And I just struggle to understand how people don't get that people have different experiences. Like, it's such a simple concept. Like, I know you and your buddy, like your sibling even, haven't had the same experiences. So why would you discount the fact that somebody is telling you that they've experienced something differently from you?
No, it's a threat. It's a threat to people, but it's get over yourself.
For real. I mean, so so the fact that, you guys are making such a concerted effort, or we are, Um, there's like another series that was out there. I don't know who was like behind it all, but it was like Share the Mic. And so it was a bunch of really prominent activists and whatever, on both white and people of color, and like they took over like their social media for the day, and listened to people of color talk about these experiences, and like to spread the message to a different group of people who may not have heard it. I was listening to a really interesting thing that was like, if your Instagram, as you're going through and scrolling through, looks like you need to diversify. Start following different people, things, to expand your horizons and learn more. Like that's what you want to experience, is perspective shifts. And you don't necessarily have to 100% agree with something, but you need to be exposed to it.
Sure.
So that was a pretty cool, I thought that was a really cool way to think it through. And it was like, if you're just seeing different versions of yourself, you need to expand.
That's right. And that's a good way to connect with a younger generation, and using social media as an example. Like,
yeah.
Maybe my 60-year-old parents they're not on Instagram, but your younger generation, using that as a benchmark, and that's a good starting point.
I think listening and being open to learning, and that kind of thing, because it's not just oh look, I've done the work and now I'm done. Like, it's a constant process, and like it's not just going to be done. You got to continue to do the work, and everybody does. I'm still learning things, even in the class. That's typically how I try to do things in the classroom, almost, where I tell my students, you're learning from me, but I'm learning from you just as much. I had a situation where a student took something that another student had said, and interpreted it in a completely different way than I did. And I just did not pick up on that kind of cue. And that's okay. We addressed it, and things were fine. But that was, I learned from that moment and was like, oh, yeah, I see how that could have been taken that way. And, you don't take offense to it. They don't. You just bring it to the attention and be like, look, this could have been problematic for someone. Let's try to avoid that. So that's pretty cool to learn from students and see their side of things too, because it's completely different, and that's okay. You just want to understand it, that it is different.
Yeah, having those constructive but hard conversations, but constructive, important.
Yes. We don't need to rage at each other. Just talk.
So Mia, how do you think this translates into particularly our victimology community in terms of actual change within the division? Like, what actionable things can we take in terms of moving the DOV forward? And then also, so I guess it's a two-part question. What advice do you have for potential scholars of color that maybe want to get a PhD in terms of navigating, wide academia?
So for the first part, as far as the division goes, I know that there are things in the works, that I won't spill the beans just yet. But that they're putting in the work to try to better diversify the division, and take action in the right ways for the current environment. So making proper types of statements that actually get to the heart of the matter, and have those real honest conversations amongst the board, whoever. Again, just listening, learning, maybe unlearning some negative types of behaviors and way things were done, implementing new stuff. You're doing what you can to highlight the people of color that you have in the division. Again, deferring to their voices in these instances, and those kinds of things. I saw a thread the other day of a couple people who I think are in the division of victimology that had talked about like seeing race as an independent variable, but not putting it in context, right? And so then multiple people were coming through and saying, my whole life is just shifted and I'm completely rethinking the way I'm approaching my research and how do I do these things. And, that's the thing we want to see. Like, yes, it was like, well done. This is great. So that was cool to see those kinds of things happening. And I mean, I think that's the kind of thing you want to see in terms of that. Again, you've got the obvious of, implementing into, your classrooms and your research. Scholars of color, cite them. They exist. They've done the work. Use it. But again, those are the obvious kinds of answers. But I think the work is happening, even if you're not seeing the direct result you were hoping to right away. But I mean, when I saw that thread of people being like, "Oh my God, this is what we should be doing. I have to do better here," I was like, "We're good. This felt like a win, but like a good one, not just a surface level kind of thing. It was, oh, okay, all right, let me rethink my entire research agenda and how I've approached this." So that was cool. As far as like potential doctoral students of color, in terms of navigating white academia, I would assume, and maybe that's wrong of me to assume, but you've probably experienced being the minority in some sort of situation, so you're probably relatively adept at dealing with it. I learned how to code switch from a very, very young age. And so, you do a lot of it in different situations, but that's, I don't know if a lot of people even think of it as code switching, but even as a grad student, like regardless of color, you code switch even when you're talking to undergrad students versus well-established, academics and scholars. Like you code switch in those conversations. So you get a handle of it. And for me, it was having good, so I had quality mentors from like my master's program that I stayed in contact with, my cohort in my program, although my cohort is 2 other white women, but they were both very progressive in their ideas about those things. And so I never felt lonely in that sense, and like I could have these conversations, or I didn't have to be the person to bring up race in the conversation in a classroom, or in a meeting. There were other people around that would address it. I actually, Northcote Bomer, Dr. Northcote Bomer, she introduced me to Dr. Nikki Jones. She had come and was giving a talk on campus, and I got to have just like in a small kind of intimate setting conversation with a few of these people. And I was like, how do you deal with almost it just automatically kind of deferring to you to be the person that addresses race? And she was like, I mean, you can either run from it and just ignore it, or lean into it and bring it up. Go ahead, become that person, because they're going to have to listen. And, but for somebody else who was maybe a white woman to be like, how am I supposed to be the person that brings that up? Is that stepping on someone else's toes? It's like, no, we want you to speak up, be that ally, because sometimes it's exhausting.
Right. You're not the expert on all things race, right? And feeling like exceptional minority and what that means, instead of engaging your white colleagues to maybe think more critically about what race means in terms of criminal justice and victimization and some of these issues. So that's a super valid point for sure.
So that was great. But so, have good people around you is probably the key. If you're even considering it, you're probably going to be okay in getting through it. Doctoral programs are exhausting no matter what. There's a little bit of more of, I think, some hidden curriculum that you might have to navigate. But join Twitter, honestly. I'm not going to lie. Twitter changed the game for me. I've never felt so connected to other people, because even if they're not in your direct community, you can still access them. So that would definitely be something to do that. And I mean, there's a whole as you saw from the hashtag Black in the Ivory Tower, there's a whole community of people on Twitter that are experiencing the same kinds of things, and you can connect with them, and it helps. It totally helps. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mia, for sharing your experiences with us, for giving us guidance on how we can move forward, for, sharing what a good ally looks like. I know that's, something that a lot of our DOV members, but beyond DOV, want to know. And so thank you for sharing all of those experiences. So we'd love to give our viewers some more information about you and your research and your teaching experiences. So on the next podcast, Mia is going to discuss her work in a little bit more detail in that area. And we hope you guys join us. Thanks, Mia.
Hooray, you're welcome.
This has been Dive into the DOV. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.